Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Captain's Table. My name is Ron Geringer. Everybody calls me Coach G. And I have the super agent, the guy who signed a ton of number one picks. In fact, a record 8. He's got 12 Hall of Famers in his NFL career that he signed as well. And he's still an agent out there grinding and making it happen. Leigh Steinberg. Thank you, Leigh, for your time. Appreciate you coming on today to the Captain's Table.
Happy to be with the Captain's Table and you.
All right, fantastic. Hey, Leigh, let's just talk about the beginning. A lot of people don't know your history a little bit and don't know your background. So why don't you give me some of your background and we'll go into some things. I read some stuff, so some fascinating stuff. You got a lot of great things happening in a short period of time. So let's talk about it.
So I grew up in Los Angeles, went to UCLA for a year, and then it was the late 60s, and campuses were changing culturally, and I went up to UC Berkeley. I was student body president, and the governor was Ronald Reagan. So every time we demonstrated against the war in Vietnam, he cracked down, and I learned everything I needed to learn from confrontations with Governor, later President Reagan. And I went to law school and I was a dorm counselor in an undergraduate dorm. And they moved the freshman football team into the dorm. And one of the students was the quarterback, Steve Bartkowski. And in 1975, he became the very first player picked in the first round of the NFL draft by the Atlanta Falcons and asked me to represent them. And really, there wasn't a settled field of sports agency at that time. A team could just slam the phone down and say, we don't have to deal with agents. So Bartkowski got the largest rookie contract in NFL history. And you know, Ron, my father had raised me with 2 core values. One was treasure relationships, especially family, and the other was try and make a positive difference in the world and help people who can't help themselves. And I saw when we got back to Atlanta, the idol worship and veneration that athletes were held in. And I thought, you know, let's do a philosophy of having athletes retrace their roots and go back to the high school community that helped shape them and set up a scholarship fund or work with the church or Boys and Girls Club. Let's have them go back to the university where somebody like Troy Aikman endowed a full scholarship at UCLA and then it just gave him another $1 million. Let's go to the pro level and find the leading political figures, business leaders, and community leaders, put them on a board, and we'll execute a program that attacks that athlete's greatest challenge. So that's work done putting the 200 single mother and her family into the first home they'll ever own by making the down payment. So that was 50 years ago, and as you said, in football, I've represented 64 first-round draft picks and the very first pick in 8 of them, and 12 players in the Hall of Fame. Big baseball practice, big basketball practice, Olympic athletes, boxers, but all of it done with the athlete being a role model.
Oh, that's fantastic. Let's talk about your dad just a little bit because I remember reading about him. He was a principal and he was a civil rights activist. So how did that influence you in any kind of way or shape or form?
Well, totally, because instead of being brought up to make millions and millions of dollars, we were brought up to do positive change in the world and to fight against racism and to fight against bullying and to fight against domestic violence. And my dad would look at me and he'd say, when you're waiting for the they or them, the amorphous they to fix a problem, as tiny as picking up a piece of trash or as large as pushing back on skinheads and racism, he'd say your tendency is to wait for they or them, the amorphous they, older people, political figures to solve problems. And he would look at me and say, you could wait forever, son, the they is you. So it imbued me with a sense that I had a responsibility to try to heal pain.
Well, that's fantastic. Let's talk about, well, you talked about Steve Bartkowski. Like you said, he was your first big deal. Um, was that smooth? Was that difficult to get that deal started? And then who followed after that that really got you going and rolling in the right direction with being an agent?
So again, there were very few models to follow, but the
Right,
fact that Bartkowski had done the biggest deal, what I had to do was make an adjustment. Because the second year I went out and talked to dozens of players from all backgrounds and had a reasonable, but not the same as Bartkowski draft. And
right,
I thought, you know, if I talk to self-starter athletes with big hearts who understand they can be role models and families that produce those players, I'm going to have a values match and be able to connect. And if I talk to 100 athletes, not. So I started to research the background of athletes and to find out, did they go on a mission to Haiti? Did they help in the inner city? What they do and what are the parents like? And try to match the values. And then everything basically took off. So Ron, the most important skill I think in life is listening. It's being able to draw out of another human being their deepest anxieties and fears and their greatest hopes and dreams.
gotcha.
And it's to understand that person uniquely. So you need to peel back the layers of the onion, get deeper and deeper until you get into what really are the values, whether it's short-term economic gain, long-term economic security, spiritual values, family, geographical, being a starter, being on a winning team, the quality of coaching. That value system is going to fit into different people's lives differently. And when I finally figured out there was a certain type of family and player I could really connect with, then it was Claire Sailing.
I got you. So you were, I would say, a trendsetter to a certain degree. Started to get players involved and get their personal goals involved in them signing the contract, I would say. Would you say that would be correct?
Yes, and then talked about other issues too. So, for example, no one had really focused on player health. And I had a crisis of conscience back in the 80s because representing half the starting quarterbacks, they kept getting hit in the head.
Right,
Go to doctors and ask how many is too many, when should they consider retirement? And they had no answers.
right,
And so I started holding concussion conferences with the leading neurologists and TBI experts and helmet manufacturers and field turf and looked at it from every standpoint. And last month in Las Vegas, we held our 30th, and we're finally making some progress on that issue. But I tried to define my responsibility to a player as being broader than just putting more money into the bank book, but trying to plan for second career from the very beginning, trying to safeguard their health and treating them as a whole person, not just their narrow athletic talent.
got you. Um, in that, uh, like you said, and you talked about it, you had a lot of basketball guys. You also signed baseball guys. You want to mention some of those names and track stars as well? You want to mention some of those names that you dealt with?
Well, in baseball, back in our first phase, we had clients like Will Clark, Matt Williams, Pudge Rodriguez, and then later Manny Ramirez, CC Sabathia, Sean Green, Adam Dunn,
Right,
Raul Mondesi. I mean, we were going head for head with my partner Jeff Morad. And then in basketball, Greg Anthony, who was a lottery pick for the
UNLV.
Yes, from
Yeah,
you.
I know Greg Rell,
Right.
lefty, great
So,
player.
so it was Greg Anthony, then I did John Starks on the Knicks with him, and then we had a first round draft pick, Austin Crozier, who went to the Indiana Pacers, and a first round draft pick, Wayne Simeon, who went to the Miami Heat, and then I did a contract or two for Byron Scott. So, and then in boxing, it was Lennox Lewis, the heavyweight champ,
Yes,
and Oscar De La Hoya.
yes,
And then in the Olympics, Brian Boitano won the gold medal in ice skating in back like in 1988.
right.
And Kerry Strug came home from nailing the gymnastics vault in the 1996, represented the U.S. team in the World Cup in 1994.
Or you had a who's list there. Let's take a break from the captain's table with our special guest, Leigh Steinberg. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the captain's table. Our special guest today is Leigh Steinberg. Let's ask this question because a lot of people don't understand the structure of a football contract versus a basketball contract or a baseball contract. In negotiations, can you explain what the differences were and how difficult it might be in one of those fields versus the other?
So for rookies in both basketball and football right now, we have salary caps. And so the draft picks are taken in order, and then each one gets a contract a little bit behind the one in front of it until you go through the rounds.
Right,
In the sport of football, players get a signing bonus, and that money is guaranteed. So there are two types of guarantees. One is skill, meaning that if a player signs a long-term contract, signs for 5 years, then the guarantee means even if he's cut and the team doesn't like the way he's playing, he still receives every penny on that original contract.
right,
Virtually all basketball contracts are guaranteed for skill, except the second rounders. And most baseball contracts are guaranteed for skill. The second issue is injury. And if a player suffers a career-ending injury in basketball and baseball, they get paid the remainder of the contract, even though they're not healthy and they're not playing. In football, the contract needs to be specifically injury guaranteed. And it wasn't until about 5 years ago that first rounders started getting guaranteed contracts in football, and then now a few of the contracts in the second round. It was a signing bonus that served as a guarantee. So in the highest risk sport with the most injuries, they had the least guarantees.
exactly.
Negotiating for veterans has a lot more freedom to it in both basketball and football. Baseball is age oriented. So when a young player comes up in the minors, he's paid at that level outside of the signing bonus when he's drafted. And then years you 1 through 3, the team can pay him anything they want to,
Right,
as long as it's the minimum. 4 through 6, there's a process called salary arbitration, where the player proposes one number, the team another, and the arbitrator has to pick between the two. And then after 6 years, players become free agents and they can go to any team. And that's why you might see a young Mike Trout playing for $700,000 in his first couple of years, although he's MVP, and a utility infielder who's hitting 268 signed for $15 million because he
okay,
had contractual freedom.
right. Let's talk about this one because this was a little bit in the NFL really highlighted and kind of touched on some of the subjects you talked about a little bit. Russell Wilson's contract and what the different Broncos asked them initially, and what was your feedback or what were your thoughts about that? What they asked him to do and how that contract ended up? If it's not putting you on the spot.
Oh, no, no. It's just that for whatever reason, Sean Payton and Russell Wilson didn't bond.
Right.
So the contract was guaranteed and he gets paid all the money. And because there's still amortized bonus, meaning that the way you do a cap number is look at the contract, see how much bonus there is, and then spread that over the length of a contract. So like $10 million contract, 5-year length, 2 million a year counts against the cap as signing bonus, but all the salary caps counts against it. So the guaranteed money part of it is dead money for the Denver Broncos. So it didn't work out very well for them.
Right.
Russell Wilson's got a new start in Pittsburgh and looks like he'll be a starter this year. And so he's got a brand new career.
No doubt about that. The part I was trying to talk about, the injury part of it, they were trying to get him to cancel that part of the contract so he wouldn't have the guarantee of the 58 million or whatever he was due when the next signing time was available.
And there was
Correct?
no way he was ever going to cancel a guarantee.
Crazy, huh? A quarterback giving that up. Like you say, in the most dangerous sport. No way he was going to do that.
Right.
Fantastic. Let's talk about this one. I don't know if you have many running backs, but the value of the running back now, where it used to be they were the guys who were prime time, they were the guys who got paid, and now they're not getting paid the same. What's your thoughts on that?
So over time, I've had a ton of running backs. I had Thurman Thomas, who's in the Hall of Fame. I had Ricky Williams. I had Edgerrin James, who's in the Hall of Fame. And back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, running backs were taken first pick in the draft and were regarded as really key. And then what happened is the modern passing game came along, and general managers started to think they could get a running back in a lower round, like an Aaron Jones in the 5th round, who ended up be really good. And then the thought was, well, they don't play that long, so then you had them undervalued as they aged. Back in the day when I had Thurman Thomas, what I did was a statistical breakdown that showed what percentage he was of the Buffalo Bills offense. And
Right,
then he really was so involved that he had as much value as the quarterback.
right,
Did I win that argument? No. But he wasn't paid like a quarterback, but he blew out the running back market
right,
because we highlighted that. And what's got to happen is the next big running back up has got to make a statistical comparison of the what he does is from scrimmage, what he does in pass catching, what he does in blocking, and show how critical he is, because most of the teams that if the running back is not being productive, then the quarterback is under extreme peril sitting back there in the pocket because they'll do a heavy rush. So you have to look at how the running back impacts the quarterback's play
right.
and the whole team. And so nobody's been able quite to frame that argument, but when they do, with the right player who's coming up at the end of the contract, they should be able to do what wide receivers did a couple years ago, which is to get themselves treated as a privileged position. And when Tyreek Hill and a number of wide receivers broke open that market.
Well, you have a great comparison, with the Giants, Saquon, Barkley, and Jones, and they end up paying Jones. But I thought Saquon made a good argument how valuable he was because he was a multi-task guy. He played on third downs. He caught the ball out of the backfield. He blocked, but they end up paying Jones, and now Saquon is gone. Your thoughts?
Um, I don't know where you find another Saquon Barkley. I don't know. I don't really understand if you have that player, how you ever let him go.
I we agree wholeheartedly. We agree. He's a guy. All right. Well, let's go a little bit further. Let's talk about you've had special relationships with special guys. Let's talk about Warren Moon. because when you did that contract, there have been a ton of successful black quarterbacks, but not on the same level as Warren had been in the CFL. How
So,
difficult was that to get him his first big contract? And then I know you maintained a relationship throughout your time with him. Let's talk about that. And let's talk about your relationship with Warren.
well, Warren and I sort of grew up together because we started together in late 77. And at the time he came out, there was real lack of confidence among certain sectors of the talent evaluation group as to whether an African American had the intellectual capacity. I know this sounds strange now when you think about Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson and on, but at the so-called thinking positions, there was an unspoken, no one would say it out loud, but it was there.
No
And
doubt.
you could tell it was there because players like Warren and later when I had Cordell Stewart, they would ask about changing positions.
Exactly.
And here's Warren, big 6'2", strong arm quarterback. I mean, you're going to have him play wide receiver or something else. It's crazy. So anyway, we signed him in Canada for what ended up being 6 years and
Right.
timed that contract. So you had a competing USFL, NFL, and CFL, three leagues fighting for him as a free agent. And they hadn't had free agency in the NFL then. He comes back and he signs the biggest contract in NFL history.
At
He
that
was
time,
an
no doubt.
extraordinary role model. He put together something, high school scholarship fund, a scholarship at University of Washington. He has something called the Crescent Moon Foundation that brings young, aspiring college students and gives them scholarships. And it's really inspiring to see the room, the way it lights up. And our relationship was so close. I had the honor of being the presenter for him as he became the first African American quarterback in the modern era to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. And so he's a shining example. And because of him, all of a sudden you've got you start to look at the MVP of the league, and it's been Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, and you start to look at the top quarterbacks, and now all of a sudden, you know, it's Caleb Williams they're talking about as the first pick in the draft. But more important, you have backup black quarterbacks.
Right.
So it's not just the exception; they're just judged as quarterbacks.
Well, fantastic. And talking about Warren, like I said, you still have a close relationship. You're inducting him in the Hall of Fame. What's Warren doing right now?
So he had a marketing company he did really well with called Sports One Marketing, and he did well. He does some broadcasts. He's I think writing another book, but you know he splits time between Seattle and Southern California, but he's had extraordinary impact on other people, both as a black quarterback playing football, but the way he carried himself and
Gotcha.
the way he impacted younger players.
Let's take a break from the captain's table. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the captain's table. Our special guest today is Leigh Steinberg. Leigh, let's throw out another guy and another name for you, Troy Aikman. Let's talk about your relationship with Troy, how that worked, how you got him in, and how that worked for you.
So Jerry Jones had just bought the Dallas Cowboys in 1989, and he had fired Bill Brandt. He had fired Tex Schramm, the president and general manager, and he fired the iconic Tom Landry. So the first positive thing he did was to draft Troy. But that team was not very good. And you saw Troy's, I think they went 1-15 his rookie year. They said if Jerry Jones bought the 7-Eleven, they'd have to change the name to the O in 11.
Right.
So, so, but I saw his toughness. And at a certain point, it was so discouraging because they kept losing and it was very difficult. And they drafted another quarterback, Steve Walsh, who
Right.
been Jimmy Johnson's quarterback.
Yeah, Miami guy, Hurricane guy, all the way.
But Troy fit so wonderfully in Dallas.
Right.
He had grown up part of the time in Southern California, part of the time in Henrietta, Oklahoma. He loved country music. He was an outdoors person. So it was a perfect match. And then they go on to win 3 Super Bowls. And so Troy was dead accurate and tough. I mean, he could take all this adversity, and at the end of it, he was smart enough to know that things were not wonderful, but he didn't care. He just give me the ball. I'm gonna go compete. And now when his career started to come towards the end, we had him do NFL Europe. So he started preparing for a broadcast career. And he put every bit of energy that he put into preparing as a pro player into preparing for broadcast, and quickly became the #1 color person. And people said to me, well, Troy's a little bit dry and dull. Well, they didn't understand that he was sitting in the middle of cowboy madness, and they needed a stable quarterback who was not creating controversy. But he always
Right.
had strong opinions and a killer sense of humor, and so it wasn't surprising when he became a big star in second career.
Okay, let's talk about another guy. Throw out the name Kenny Easley, who was a great safety, probably at that time very comparable to Ronnie Lott, but his career was shortened by the kidney problem. A
Yep.
guy who was a great player. Go ahead.
So back in those days, they had big vats filled with pills, and medical treatment was not all that great. So Kenny had, I think it was his hip. He had something that hurt him, and they said, "Well, just take a bunch of Advil." So he was scooping up Advil and taking a ton of it. Eventually, he got traded from Seattle to Arizona, and he failed the physical because he had like 7% kidney function. He was the last defensive back to be Defensive Player of the Year. And it's hard today to explain just how dominating he was. They shut down his whole area of the field for the offense. They would not throw to his side. So he ended up being so dominating. And look, I've had Bruce Smith, the all-time sack leader, Derek Thomas. I've had a lot of great defensive players, but no one was greater than he was. But his career was foreshortened. He's now in the Hall of Fame, but his career was foreshortened by the fact that he wasn't treated the right way medically.
Definitely, no doubt. He definitely was on the Ronnie Lott kind of career if he had some longevity, but it shortened and it was a shame. But he was a great football player, and if you didn't see him during that time, he was probably just as good as Ronnie.
I think better, and but you're talking about great and great. So
Right. I'm not trying to yeah, Ronnie's great and he's an SC guy and I'm a UCLA guy, so I'm not trying to diminish anything. Ronnie was super. Let's talk about the movie, Jerry Maguire. A lot of people talk about that. They talk about you being portrayed in that movie. How much did you have to do with that movie? How much was it, you know, resembled your life during that time?
in 1993, a film writer director named Cameron Crowe called me and asked if he could follow me around and pick up atmosphere for a film he was doing based on a sports agent. And he had written a book which was made into a funny movie called Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Remember?
And so I said, sure. And he came with me to the draft in '93, where Drew Bledsoe was the first pick, and up to the press conference in Foxborough with Bill Parcells. He came to the league meetings and watched me walking players around with teams um, and he came to games and he came to pro scouting day at USC and Super Bowl parties that I threw and spent a lot of time in my office. And I told him lots of stories. So he went off and he wrote a script, and that became Jerry Maguire. And I was the technical advisor, so I had to vet the script to make sure the willing suspension of disbelief that keeps you in a motion picture didn't get broken.
Right,
So you didn't think the dialogue was stilted or the look was wrong. And
right,
then he gave me actors like Cuba Gooding Jr., and I took him down to the Super Bowl in Phoenix and made him pretend for the week he was a wide receiver client of mine. So
right.
he hung out with Desmond Howard and Amani Toomer, and he put him in role. And it was Regina King and Tom Cruise and I actually had to show the quarterback in the film, played by Jerry O'Connell, how to throw a spiral because he had gone to NYU and they didn't have a football program there. So there's a lot of life up there on the screen. And for the last 26 years, every time I go to an airport or go out to dinner, someone runs up to the table and either says the four words or asks me to say the four words start with, show me
Either
the.
one. That could be bothersome, I'm sure, at times. Uh, but it did highlight the sports agent and said a lot of, I thought said a lot of good things as well.
Well, I think it humanized and the whole concept. And sports agents at that point had normally be greedy, sleazy, avaricious, just cared about the dollars. And I think he saw as I was interacting with Warren Moon and Tim McDonald and Desmond Howard and a whole bunch of players, the true caring that exists there. So it was an interesting experience. And then I went on and worked on a movie called Any Given Sunday. Um, and that was originally a rapper was supposed to play the role of quarterback, but he couldn't throw the football, so they had to replace him. And that gave a young comedic actor his first dramatic role, and that was Jamie Foxx.
I remember it well with LL Cool J.
Yeah, so I worked with Jamie, I worked with Al Pacino and Cameron Diaz and put them in role into understanding what the thought process would be if you were a woman owning a football team, or if you were an aging coach, or if you were a first-time quarterback. What would your mindset be? What would the influences be on you?
Okay. Now, I read in a statement, I don't know if it's true or not, that you said you felt like your life was still best described with the name Forrest Gump versus Jerry Maguire. You want to elaborate on that a little bit?
It's just that I've had an unusual uh, set of interactions over time. It was my grandfather ran a place called Hillcrest Country Club in Los Angeles, and that's where our younger listeners won't get these names, but it was Groucho Marx and Jack Benny and George Burns, and they were all comedians. And I have a picture on Marilyn Monroe's lap. And then I go up to Berkeley, and I'm student body president, and met people like Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison and Gloria Steinem and end up interacting with Ronald Reagan. He ends up president, and it just kept going that way. And now we have Patrick Mahomes.
So you kind of feel like you've been blessed. No doubt about it. Let's talk a little bit. You had some downtime. You had some issues for a little bit, and now you rebounding and you showed your resilience and you're making a second career. So let's talk about your agency now. If you want to talk about a little bit of your sobriety uh, and how important that's been in you doing what you're doing now and what you're doing and what it is.
So I struggled with alcohol, and by the time I hit 2010, I just knew that the only important thing was for me to be sober and a good father. And I got help from a unique fellowship. I worked a 12-step program, and pretty soon the detritus and the darkness and the foreboding was substituted for by sobriety. And tomorrow, as a matter of fact, is my 14th continuous sober birthday. And
Congratulations on that.
so the question is not whether life's going to knock us back, because it is. The question is can you recover and be resilient and start again? So I started rebuilding, and in 2016, we did a first round quarterback, who was Paxton Lynch. So that got the practice going, because that's the position I'd always dominated. And then the next year we had Patrick Mahomes and Aaron Jones and a variety of players. And then for a while, Tua Jerry Jeudy. And so, but remember, my perspective was that if I could maintain sobriety and be a good father, everything else was a cherry on top. That was ultimately important. And what saved me was a sense of proportionality, so that, I had had my father die of cancer, and my two boys were diagnosed with blindness, and there were a series of things, and I reacted to them by trying to numb myself. And finally, I had a sense of proportionality and said, wait a minute, I'm not a starving peasant in Darfur. I don't have a last name in the 1930s in Nazi Germany, and the last name is Steinberg. I don't have cancer. I'm not sick in any way. What excuse do I have not to live up to my dad's admonitions about being good? And so ultimately, at the end of the day, how I'm going to judge myself is, was I a good father? Was I a good son? Was I a good brother? Was I a good husband? Was I good to my friends? Was I there for them when times were tough and it might have cost me something to be a friend? And then did I try to walk through the world and understand the pain that people feel, whether it's domestic violence or bullying or sex trafficking or racism or the environment, and try to leave something better than we found it.
That's good. Let's take a break from the captain's table with our special guest, Leigh Steinberg. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the captain's table. Our special guest today is Leigh Steinberg. Leigh, you want to talk about what your goals is for the company today and where you're trying to go to?
So one of the things that I've been searching for is there a way to stimulate athletic performance in critical moments? So games are coming down to the fourth quarter and the last drive. So is there a way to alter the productivity in those moments? And second of all, because of the cap system, if a team loses a player at a critical position, his backup is not someone just a minor bit worse. It's a precipitous drop in talent. So losing a key player during the season in basketball or in football ends up totally altering the playoff drive. So I started exploring, and then were the things that could help us, the weekend warriors, have better cognitive ability and live longer and healthier. So I looked at hyperbaric oxygen and stem cells and blue, white, and red light, and a process called NanoV, and then into a couple treatments for the brain that can restore memory. And the theory is neuroplasticity, so that the brain can be rewired in essence, and made quicker and younger. And one of the processes is something called RTMS, and the other process is Nestry brain training with Dr. Tommy Shavers in Lake Nona. And so that's a big project that I'm working on. We're doing more agent academies where we train the younger generation in listening skills, how to recruit athletes, how to negotiate contracts, how to do branding and marketing, how to set up a charitable foundation, how to do damage control. So I'm doing another one next month in Las Vegas. And then I'm in the middle of writing my third book, and this would be titled Comeback, Resilience, and What Matters in Life. And so it would leave off, it would start again where the agent left off, which was back in 2013, and sort of retrace these last years.
Okay, fantastic. Let's talk about NIL. What do you think about that? Do you think it can destroy the college game? Do you think it's better for the college game? Your thoughts?
All the NCAA had to do was realize there were athletes sitting on a campus who came from economically challenged circumstances, who were living at a lower standard of living than their non-athletic peers. And you wouldn't have needed millions of dollars. You could have taken players with special need, and $10,000 would have seemed like wonderful. But they waited and they waited and they held on too tight. And then California passed SB 206 back in 2020. And when people realized California athletes were going to be able to hire marketing people, then the rest of the states jumped on board, and then the NCAA jumped on board. But right now, it's altered the collegiate landscape forever.
Right.
Because it's not just juniors, seniors who are doing NIL. There are high school players.
Yes.
Who are sophisticated, understand how to brand, and they're putting together websites, and they're the way you judge market value is by how many followers you have on TikTok or Twitter or Instagram, and they're all producing content. So so the process has started much younger. And so the whole concept, this is somehow amateurism and this way station before you got to the pros, that's all gone.
Right.
And then the other thing no one expected was that collectives would form of businessmen who were alums of each of the big colleges. And they would use their businesses to form these collectives. And all of a sudden, the money would be used in recruiting off a college campus. And the money would be used in recruiting at the transfer portal.
Right.
So right now, you have high school players who are in essence free agents being offered one bid or not by colleges. Well, that's a change. And it's spreading pretty broadly. I mean, it's not just Caleb Williams who has NILs. It's thousands of college and high school athletes.
All right. So do you think it's a betterment or a detriment?
I think it's better to allow players to be realistic in terms of having a market value, but I think it brings on professionalism at too early an age.
Thank you. How about social media? How has that affected contracts, the way you deal with your clients, everything? How has social media and the instance of it, changed how you may do things now?
Well, remember, I grew up with newspapers
Right.
and a set number of television networks and everything. And now the form of communication changed. It's all over social media. And between texting and tweeting and posting, that's the way information flows. So it's a dramatic change. And athletes brand themselves now. So what's a brand? It's how this individual athlete distinguishes himself from the mass.
Right.
And So this is now the skill set, and it also gives athletes a direct voice where instead of just doing interviews, they can post. And that can be a danger. They have to be very careful in terms of what they post and when they post, and it can be an advantage. So we never needed to come to all this except that social media was going to realize that athletes are part of the entertainment business. And this is a celebrity-driven society where it's all about interesting people. So you have to master social media to be a well-endorsed athlete today, and we all need to use it.
Okay, no doubt. So do you monitor your own clients or advise them, I guess?
So we talk about guidelines, which is that, you know, if you have a really strong political point of view or a mission statement, then if you can make sure you're informed on it and you understand and you know that there's certain issues, partisan politics, abortion that are just too sensitive, and you need the concept of restraint in pen and tongue. So you need to tell an athlete that they're speaking in a microphone that goes all over the world, that it's not a private form of communication.
All right. Leigh, anything you'd like to touch before we get off? Anything you'd like to talk about? You do a Super Bowl party every year?
Yes,
Something along that line? You got one coming up again?
yes, I do it. We've done it 37 years. And the Super Bowl is a convention Americana. So we have big business, sports, politics, entertainment, all in one thing. We do humanitarian awards for an owner, a general manager, coach, player, retired player that award highlights their philanthropic things they do. We have a brain health summit every year that we do at the Super Bowl party with neurologists exploring every aspect of it. We do, this year we did a celebrity poker tournament with Phil Hellmuth and Jamie Gold. We did a brain body lounge with some of those modalities I talked with you about, the ways to restore health and prevent injury. And we did an esport competition where the University of Michigan played Michigan State. And then we raised money for Special Olympics. So it's a party and it's a lot of fun, but it also is educational and mission oriented. And so we do it every year, and next year's we've had a good West Coast run where it's been Los Angeles, Phoenix, and then Las Vegas, but now it's going back east to New Orleans.
All right. Well, my dad's hometown, without a doubt. Leigh, I'd like to thank you for your time. I'd like to thank you for being on the captain's table. You've done a great job. You enlightened me greatly on a lot of different issues. And I know with your resilience, there's many great things still to happen for you. And so we appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Ron.
All right. Take care, Leigh. You have a great day. Thank you.
Bye.